Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Hone, President and CEO of the Portland Business Alliance, Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our COVID-19 Recovery Roundtable with Oregon Governor Kate Brown. More than 1,000 of you have signed up to join us today from across the state. Thank you and hello to the many chambers of commerce and business associations, as well as other trade groups who have joined us. We'll be posting a recording of today's event on our website later today. Today's roundtable is co-hosted by our statewide partners with the Oregon Business Plan. The Oregon Business Plan is a coalition of 3 organizations: the Portland Business Alliance, Oregon Business and Industry, and the Oregon Business Council. Thank you to Governor Brown for including our organizations in the statewide Economic Recovery Task Force. Joining us today from Oregon Business and Industry is CEO Sandy McDonough, and from Oregon Business Council is President Duncan Weiss. Thank you both for joining us for this conversation with Governor Brown. Sandy, I'd like you to give you a moment to say hello.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Duncan and I are very happy to be here and be part of this conversation, and we welcome our members from all over Oregon today. We've been working very closely with Governor Brown and her staff over the last 5 weeks as we have dealt with this coronavirus pandemic in Oregon, and I want to start by thanking Governor Brown for all that she has done and her willingness to continue conversations with us. Thank you for being here today, Governor, and we look forward to hearing from you. Back to you, Andrew.
Sandy, thank you. Well, we are grateful for OBI and OBC co-hosts of this event. Events like this can't happen without sponsorship and sponsorship support. And I'm happy to introduce today's sponsor of this COVID-19 Recovery Roundtable, TMT Development. Please welcome Vanessa Sturgeon, President and CEO of TMT Development and Chair of the Portland Business Alliance.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome to what will no doubt be the most exciting and important call of the week for most of us. Thank you for joining this afternoon for a conversation with our Governor, Kate Brown. I'm Vanessa Sturgeon, President and CEO of TMT Development and the Chair of the Portland Business Alliance. TMT is a local real estate development and property management firm, and we're very concerned about the fate of our treasured small businesses in Oregon during this pandemic. Yet it has been a heartening experience to speak to our colleagues in real estate and find that so many of them are going far out of their way to support their tenants who are struggling to make it out of this pandemic with an intact business. In addition to the businesses that are suffering, this pandemic has placed an exclamation point on the prevalence of issues impacting the homeless population, as well as those suffering from mental health and addiction. TMT is doing everything we can to support the organizations that are there to help those in need, and we have never been more proud to be Oregonians. There can be no doubt that the quick and decisive actions taken by Governor Brown and her staff have saved thousands of lives and are the reason that Oregon has the 3rd lowest infection rate in the country. And when we found ourselves well equipped with ventilators, they did what Oregonians do and sent them where they are needed most. Thank you, Governor Brown. Your actions and leadership during this crisis have been nothing short of admirable. Also, thanks to all of our members for their continued engagement and collaboration. Thank you again, and back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Vanessa. Today, we are joined by Governor Kate Brown for this COVID-19 Recovery Roundtable. Governor Brown will begin by sharing with us the latest on the state's plans to restart and reopen. After her presentation is complete, both Sandy and I, along with members of our respective organizations, will ask a series of questions. We will also have time for some questions from you in our audience. The only questions we'll be reviewing will be through the Q&A tool that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom window. We ask that you include your full name, your organization, and the location of your business when submitting your questions. With that, please join me in welcoming Oregon's Governor Kate Brown. Thank you for joining us today, Governor Brown, and thank you for your leadership in guiding the state through this unprecedented healthcare and economic crisis. It is obvious that your decisive actions have saved countless lives here in the state and put Oregon and our economy on a better track for recovery than others. Not only that, you were able to step in and help New York, one of the most impacted centers of the COVID-19 outbreak here in the US. I appreciate that as an ex-New Yorker. Your gifts of ventilators speak volumes on that generosity and the ability to act and help others in a time of need. With that, the floor is yours, Governor.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you to Sandra at OBI and Duncan at OBC, and Vanessa, thanks for that very kind introduction. It's really great to see all of you today. I honestly wish we could all be in the same room. I do want to thank you for doing your best while keeping your physical distance while we keep Oregon moving forward. As you all just heard, because of the tremendous sacrifices that Oregonians have made, Oregon has been very successful thus far in bending the curve of the COVID-19 disease. I also want to say a shout out and a thank you to Oregonians who are making sacrifices by showing up to work every day to work in critical jobs. Whether you're a firefighter, a nurse, a grocery store clerk, or a bank manager, your work is absolutely key to keeping Oregon moving forward. Thank you for your dedication and, frankly, your flexibility in this really challenging time for Oregon, for our nation, and frankly, for the entire world. As you know, we took a different approach than other states in our Stay Home, Save Lives order. We trusted that manufacturers and construction firms would work hard to make sure that their work sites and employees were safe, and we knew that Oregonians would hold them accountable to do so. We did have to close a number of businesses that unfortunately were not safe to operate during the outbreak, which has led to really painful closures of our favorite restaurants, music venues, and Main Street fixtures. We're working with those sectors now to identify a path to reopening, to make a safe transition when we have in place the public health infrastructure that we need. I don't need to tell you that it will take time before Oregon is back to normal, but as Dr. Fauci stated, we don't set the timeline, the virus sets the timeline. And I certainly recognize that for business owners who are waiting for a green light to get back to work, this is incredibly painful, both emotionally and financially. I have been very heartened to see the federal government's efforts to infuse cash into our economy through the Payroll Protection Program and the Pandemic Disaster Relief Grant Program. And I've been working throughout this response to stand up state resources and provide regulatory relief in the Oregon way. Together with the Secretary of State and multiple agencies, we stood up our Small Business Navigator program at Business Oregon. It's a hotline for businesses to call when they need help navigating the relief packages that are available. Through an executive order, I issued a commercial eviction moratorium, making it clear that businesses without customers or sales shouldn't be kicked to the curb in this time of crisis. And within weeks of Oregon's first known case, we convened the Coronavirus Economic Advisory Council and our regional advisory councils across the state. I know many of you heard on the call today are serving on those councils. Thank you for your input, and thank you for your hard work on behalf of Oregonians. There is clearly more to do. More than 290,000 Oregonians have filed unemployment claims so far. To give you a little perspective, net job losses in Oregon totaled 147,000 during the Great Recession. Our social safety net is also strained under the weight of need, whether it's food, housing, or healthcare. We are going to face some very difficult budget decisions in the coming months as those bills come due and our state revenues adjust to the new economic reality unfolding before us. But what this crisis has shown me is that our state continues to be different than the rest of the country. We know how to work together to overcome hard challenges. And when the water gets choppy, and it's certainly very choppy right now, we all get in the boat together and start rowing. Of course, we have to remain 6 feet apart while we're in that boat together. That's what it's going to take to get through this, all of us working together. I'm certainly looking forward to today's conversation and our continued partnership. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my Chief of Staff, Nick Blasser.
Everybody, let me make sure my screen gets shared here. I have I'm going to run through in hopefully 10 or 15 minutes, really briefly, the governor's framework in terms of how she's directed state agencies to work on restarting public life and business in Oregon. So I've got my screen up and I'm just going to advance through here. Hopefully this will answer a bunch of your questions. I see a bunch of questions posted in the Q&A, and hopefully this will begin to answer some of those. The governor said this a few minutes ago. We don't make the timeline, the virus makes the timeline. And I think the reality we're all living under is that we will be living with this virus in our communities until there is immunity, which is many, many months off. So going back to business as usual or business as normal pre-COVID is not something that's going to happen right away. I think most of you know that. But I think it's just a very sobering fact that we all have to live with. The major goal as we're looking at reopening is to keep the curve flattened. So as Vanessa said at the beginning, through really strong actions from the governor early on, she was able to flatten the curve. So if you look at this blue line, if we continue with the aggressive interventions we have, we will have flat hospitalizations of COVID, and we would like to keep that. But we also want to lift up on some of these restrictions. But as you've seen all the various diagrams, if we lift up too quickly, we will see a spike in hospitalizations. And that's the main thing we're trying to avoid. And you see that both in modeling and in experience in other countries. So we have to be very careful about it. What I'm going to do is just briefly go through the Opening Up America Again guidelines released by President Trump a few days ago and endorsed by the Centers for Disease Control. And I'll comment a little bit on how Oregon is going to have an Oregon interpretation of some of these. The framework is as follows. There's 3 different parts of the framework and 3 components within each part. There's what they call gating criteria and core state preparedness that they want every state to have met. You might think of these as prerequisites. Once we have to have declining symptoms, declining cases, a robust testing and contact tracing in place. And then once we have all that, there are 3 phases of lifting of restrictions. And I think it's important to note, though, that even phase 3 is not back to business as usual. It's still living with the virus and doing a lot of things we're doing today. So I'm not going to go into this in super detail, but I do think a lot of people have questions about how these prerequisites will work. At a very high level, the gating criteria relate to declining symptoms that are reported, declining cases, and hospitals that are treating patients without crisis care, which, for example, means they have plenty of personal protective equipment and nurses don't have to use 1 mask a day for multiple patients. And in addition, that hospitals have really robust testing programs for all of their healthcare workers who are at risk. So we're feeling pretty good about being able to meet these gating criteria, generally speaking, over the coming couple of weeks. And the governor's medical advisory panel met the last 2 days kind of to talk about these. That's the gating criteria. The other things that we're working on really significantly this week is all the preparedness related items. So the biggest one of those is really the testing and what's called contact tracing. So basically we want to be able to have the ability to rapidly test people, everyone who needs a test, and then if we find a positive, be able to trace all their contacts and make sure that there's a quarantine or isolation strategy. So I'm not going to go into all of the detail here, but suffice it to say, we're creating a very detailed testing plan that is statewide. And I think the other important thing I'll introduce here is the governor's been very clear in her direction to us that she doesn't want necessarily a one-size-fits-all for the entire state. She wants to make sure that if certain counties, particularly rural counties that have 0 cases, there's 5 rural counties in Oregon that have had 0 cases, that certain counties, if they can meet the testing and contact tracing requirements, might be able to move into a phase 1 of lifting of restrictions before certainly more urban counties. So We're working very hard this week on a robust plan for testing and contact tracing. We're doing pretty well in the second part in terms of surge capacity for the healthcare system. We still have a shortage of personal protective equipment, and I would say we're optimistic that that is getting resolved over the next couple of weeks, but we still have a shortage there. And then the final piece here, which is what the federal government just called plans, but there's a lot of guidelines. So every type of business that was forced to close, we're working with them in a very operational context to finalize plans and guidelines for them to reopen. Under what conditions can restaurants and childcare and personal services like salons reopen? As well as additional guidelines potentially for riders and employees of mass transit. So if all those prerequisites are met, the governor can give the green light and phase 1 lifting of restrictions can begin. The guidelines for many, as we've said, are going to stay. Certain guidelines will stay. Everyone is going to have to still continue to practice good hygiene, stay home if you're sick, and implement physical distancing or social distancing guidelines like we are today. In the phase 1 initial lifting, vulnerable individuals will really continue to be sheltering in place or staying at home like they are today. And when in public, everybody should continue to maximize physical distancing. Non-essential travel really should not occur, and we should continue to telework whenever possible. So that is all still not changing. The things that are changing or would change as we begin to gradually lift these restrictions are things like childcare, looking at restaurants, what can we do with sit-down dining? What can we do with personal services? I think what you see here is a grid that shows really specifically what the federal phase 1 proposal is, and then in more detail on the right, what the Oregon interpretation of that is, because a lot of what the federal government said is that you can do these things with, quote, strict physical distancing and sanitation protocols, but really didn't define that. So we're trying to do all the work now of defining what that means, in particular for restaurants. As I mentioned, we're really taking a close look at geographical considerations, because certain parts of the state might be ready to reopen parts of their economies before others. And we're trying to figure out how to get the regional hospital systems and the local county commissions and the county public health officer involved with thinking through and supporting the request for their county to reopen. So the basic framework is, after you meet the prerequisites, you go to phase 1, we lift the restrictions, and then we wait for 14 days to see if there's an increase in symptoms or cases. If there's not, we can move to phase 2, which is a further lifting of restrictions that includes schools and gyms, and potentially increasing the gathering size and potentially allowing non-essential travel. All the details of what's in phase 2 and 3 are still being worked on, but the basic principle is you lift a little bit, you wait a couple weeks, make sure you haven't allowed transmission to increase too much, and then you can lift a little bit more. And that's the basic framework, and all the details about what gets lifted at what stage is what we're working on right now. And I'll just end with saying what we're focused on, and today's a good example, is communicating this high-level framework really to everyone across the state as much as we can, local elected officials, business community, counties. And the other really specific thing we're doing is we started, and Leah Horner on our team is leading this work, started 6 sector-specific discussions, because we know we need specific guidelines and plans for these sectors. And you can see these on the screen here: restaurants, retail, personal services, childcare, transit, and outdoor recreation. So our goal is next week to release some drafts of these for people to look at and comment on. But we're moving as quickly as we can on these sectors. And I think with that, I'm basically done. I think that this is the timeline. We just want to let you know we're working on the high-level framework. We're working on the sector-specific conversations, and we're hoping by the week of May 4th to be able to release complete details on what does the testing and contact tracing plan look like across the state, including in every geography, and then what is the step-by-step, what exactly is in phase 1, 2, and 3. And I will just add, we are working in coordination with other West Coast states, because we know businesses that operate across state borders, it would be efficient if we had similar guidelines, and we're trying to share as much information as we can to make that easier for compliance. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I think we're ready to go back to you or Sandy to head into questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you to Nick Blasser, your Chief of Staff. Has been a great partner to all of us. So we want to take a moment to give many of our members the opportunity to ask some questions. First, joining us is Janet Campbell, who is the Chief of Staff over at Cambia Health Solutions. Janet, welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Governor Brown. Would like to just start off with the overall public healthcare response. What does the data show you at this time, and how are our systems and frontline professionals doing? And then there's a lot of discussions around models, and what do the current models tell you?
Thank you for that question. So what I would say is that because of the sacrifices that Oregonians have made and the early and decisive decisions that I took, we have done a really good job flattening the curve, but we haven't crushed it yet, and we need to crush it. And that's why it's important that as we move into the reopening phases, that we do it gradually and incrementally. In terms of the data, I hope folks are seeing sort of our OHA daily updates. We're roughly about 2,000 Oregonians that have it now. We've unfortunately lost about 80 Oregonians. But the good news is the transmission is slowing and the curve is flattening. The other piece I would say in terms of our frontline healthcare workers, I want to say a shout out to all of them. They have done tremendous work under very difficult circumstances. Our COVID-19 rate for our healthcare workers is about 18%. That's a little less than what we see across the rest of the country. The rest of the country is showing about 22%. And that we're working hard to make sure we have enough personal protective equipment for all of our frontline workers, not just our healthcare workers, but our grocery store workers, our folks doing transit, our first responders, obviously, and folks taking care of vulnerable Oregonians in our long-term care facilities and in our foster care homes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Our next question is going to be from Craig Smith of Food Northwest. As you know, they represent food producers all over Oregon. Craig?
Hi, Governor. Nice to see you today. Thanks for being with us. Hey, I'm joining you today from my home office in Salem, but as you know, our companies are located throughout the state. And yesterday, you made it clear that you're not going to delay the corporate activities tax, and said that it's the best way to protect small business and middle-class taxpayers. Governor, small business owners and middle-class taxpayers, they're really the same thing, and along with every other business in this state, we're facing a crisis of liquidity. We lack the access that we need to operating cash, and companies are liquidating inventory, retooling their supply chains, laying off employees, shuttering factories, all of this you know. In short, we're doing everything we can to hang on to operating cash. And many companies, even those that have remained open, simply don't have the kind of cash it's going to take to restart the economy. It's a huge issue out there. Consequently, we've been asking and today are pleading with you to delay the start of the corporate activities tax for just 6 months. Not to do away with it, but just to delay the implementation as a part of preserving scarce operating capital and to allow us to restart the economy. And so that's our question today.
Thank you, Craig. I certainly appreciate the question. And I obviously know that businesses large and small across the state are feeling a lot of pain as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. I just want to point out that the Student Success Act revenue plan already excludes every single business with less than $1 million in revenue. So we're not really talking about your local pizza shop, your local corner store, or your barber. The Student Success Act was carefully negotiated with business leaders to make long-term investments in our schools, and it's certainly a critically important investment in Oregon's future workforce. We know that the closure of our schools due to COVID-19 is going to impact children across the state. They are missing out on weeks of learning, even as our schools and our teachers are moving mountains to implement distance learning. The investments we make now in our schools via the Student Success Act will help our state's children recover and get us back on track for the future of Oregon.
Thank you, Governor. It's Sandy again. I think we have a follow-up question from Brittany Quick from the Eugene Chamber. Oops, and I'll start my video. There you go. Brittany.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. Like Sandy said, I'm the CEO of the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. I appreciate the opportunity to log on and chat with you this afternoon. So I do have a follow-up. I will say that we have nearly 400 businesses who in the last day have who've spoken up in the Eugene-Springfield area to sign on to a letter asking you to do exactly what Craig said, to just postpone that corporate activity tax. I can absolutely appreciate the fact that, you know, the schools have budgets that they've created. I think the hard part is if these businesses are going out of business, then they're not going to have funding down the road either. So if delaying the corporate activity tax isn't an option, I would love if you could provide a little bit of clarity for our businesses. They're hearing that, you know, if they provide a good faith estimate and pay that, but I think folks are confused what good faith means. You know, you've asked private companies like utilities and landlords not to evict, to stop services or assessments to folks who can't pay. Can you do that also for the corporate activity tax? We would love for the Department of Revenue not to assess penalties if folks just don't have the cash to pay right now.
Thank you for that question, Brittany. And yes, that is absolutely the case. We have been very, very clear. The Department of Revenue is not going to assess payments for this first quarterly pay period. So we're asking people to do the best that they can, and we will not be issuing any type of penalty for this reporting period.
Thank you, Governor. And now I'd like to welcome Patrick Gilligan, who's the Executive Vice President with Lincoln Property Company here in Portland. Patrick.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, Governor. We oversee more than 5 million square feet of office and industrial product here in the Portland metro area, which is home to over 150 tenants. And want to thank you for working with us to provide some clarity and sideboards on your statewide commercial eviction moratorium. Could you give us an update on the moratorium? Why did you think it was necessary? How long do you plan on keeping it in place? And do you anticipate giving any state help to commercial landlords, especially smaller ones who still have to pay mortgages, cleaning staff, management teams, utilities, contractors, et cetera?
Thank you so much for the question. The moratorium is in place for 90 days and was effective April 1st. I was overwhelmed hearing from small business owners heading into the first of the month with uncertainty about their livelihoods and looking for a reprieve to be able to reassess if or how they could continue their business operations. I also know that this decision put a strain on mortgage holders. So we have been working really closely with lending institutions who, for the most part, are also working to be flexible. There are a few circumstances, such as the commercial mortgage-backed securities, which structurally are a problem for negotiating. And we've been working with the Department of Consumer and Business Services to identify possible solutions to assist landlords, which we are still exploring. While we don't have state assistance available for commercial landlords, we're obviously closely tracking the CARES Act, which has a number of provisions and programs in it to assist commercial landlords.
Thank you, Governor. Our next question is coming from Mike Donnelly, who's down in the Medford area with Carestream. They're a global manufacturer. Mike, you need to unmute.
Good afternoon, Governor Brown. I have a two-part question. You've laid out the criteria for reopening the Oregon economy. I think we all agree that health considerations, specifically preventing spikes in COVID outbreaks, must be our top priority. But at some point, we also need to weigh risk exposure, balancing the huge economic costs with health risks. How are you evaluating the issue of risk balance? And then in part two, we know you've assembled a team of health advisors as consultants for healthcare decision-making. Have you also put together a team of business and economic advisors to consult with regarding economic risk to Oregon business vitality?
So in answer to your first question, there's absolutely no question that my top priority is to protect the health and safety of Oregonians. That also obviously has to be balanced with protecting their livelihoods. In terms of how we shut down the state, I think we took a very thoughtful approach, and we did it in a way that protected some parts of the business community. For example, we didn't shut down the construction industry like some of our neighbors. The science dictates that we need to complete specific prereqs in order to start the reopening process. As Nick mentioned, we need to slow the growth of cases. We need to see fewer and fewer cases of COVID-19. Second, we need adequate personal protective equipment like masks, gloves, and gowns. And third, we have to have a robust public health framework to support the reopening effort with testing capacity, contact tracing, and an isolation quarantine program. I do have to say, though, Oregon ingenuity really came out as we were looking to produce PPE, personal protective equipment. I know there's been businesses established in Central Oregon. I know that Nicole Bassett at Renewal Workshop in Cascade Locks is partnering with Maui Myers and Hood River to create gowns. We know that companies large and small, ADAC, Nike, a few other companies are all working to produce PPE. So I just really appreciate that effort. So that's the when we open, moving to how we reopen, and we'll certainly continue to have conversations with leaders in the business community about what that looks like. Nick mentioned this week we're having sector-specific conversations with folks in restaurant and food service, with retailers, childcare, and personal services like hair and salon, nail salons. We also need to bring together business owners and practitioners with health professionals to discuss how we can reopen gradually. I think everyone in this Zoom room knows that the shuttering of an economy at this scale has never, ever happened before. Likewise, the reopening of a shuttered economy of the scale has never, ever happened. So I will continue to make decisions based on science and facts in consultation with public health experts and epidemiologists.
Thank you, Governor. Our next question is from my colleague, Joe Krenowitz, who runs the Madras Chamber of Commerce. Joe?
Excuse me. Good afternoon, Governor. The next state revenue forecast is due in late May with an anticipation of tax revenues being down substantially. Can you give us a sense of how you will be addressing this? What plans are you considering to reducing the spending in state agencies and programs not mission to the COVID-19 crisis? And has there been a hiring freeze or furloughs or other efforts to cut costs?
Let's see, hiring freeze and other. So in terms of the revenue forecast, it comes out May 20th. And I think the challenge is we are in what I would consider a quadruple bind. We expect the revenue forecast to be down. I think crater is probably the appropriate word. Secondly, we are in the midst of a global pandemic, and our public health needs are quite extensive. Third, obviously, because of the suppression of the economy, we have a number of families across the state who are in dire financial circumstances. And so the need is great, from housing to food to access to healthcare. And then fourth, unlike the federal government, we have to balance our budgets. So we are waiting for the guidance from the federal government for the Coronavirus Relief Act. It was due on Friday. We haven't seen it yet today, but that will be very, very helpful. Oregon as a state is getting roughly $1.6 billion. That will include resources going to local jurisdictions as well. But as far as we know, as of right now, those resources are limited to COVID-19 expenditures and can't be used to replace revenue. Here is one place where the governors across the country are totally and completely aligned, whether they are very, very conservative or very, very progressive, and that is we all need flexibility in terms of these dollars, and we have to balance our budgets, and the federal relief must be flexible in a way that will allow us to supplant loss of state revenues. In terms of the actions we're taking, my tools as a governor are somewhat limited. I have the ability to call the legislature in session. I have the ability to do across the board cuts. I cannot start those until we have the May revenue forecast. And obviously we're working internally with state agency directors. They are aware of the financial challenges. We're looking at all of the tools that we have to reduce what I would consider non-essential state expenditures. I just have to tell you, in my 20 plus years in state government and public service, the tools we normally have, non-essential travel, don't purchase any technology, no hiring freezes, have been somewhat of a challenge in this COVID-19 environment. As an example, we've asked our state employees to work from home. They obviously need computers to do that. Our employment department had 100 people at the outset. They now are employing, I think they're moving up to 800 state employees to address the needs. So our normal tools aren't particularly helpful right now, and would really appreciate your suggestions and your thoughts about how we can streamline state government in a time when the services we provide are absolutely critical to families and communities across the state.
Okay, so now we have another question from Tim Levitt, who's with OTAC on infrastructure.
Hey, thank you, Andrew. Hello, Governor. Nice to be with you today. I'm a civil engineer with OTAC, and we're an international architectural and engineering consulting firm with headquarters in Portland. And I've got a few questions for you, a few parts to this question, if you'll please, regarding infrastructure. Public infrastructure investments can and should play a significant role in economic recovery. What opportunities do you see for these sort of investments going forward? That's part one. We certainly are glad to see the decision to move forward with the Rose Quarter project with bringing on a general contractor. We agree with the move to work closely with Albina Vision. Can you share with us your perspective on the status of this project, and what do you see as the key factors for keeping this vital project on track now going forward? And then lastly, Governor, could you share with us your thoughts on other potential infrastructure projects like higher ed capital projects? Thank you.
I think that was a great way to sneak in 4 or 5 questions into one. I'll try and get them all answered. So in terms of infrastructure, obviously, we have the advantage of being able to make investments and create jobs in communities around the state. So I see this as key to our economic recovery. I have to tell you, the most important thing that's on my radar screen right now is making sure that all of our communities have access to the internet. And the the head of the CDC said yesterday that we are likely to see a very strong surge in the fall. Our kids can't lose any more education time. So I have a extreme sense of urgency around building out our broadband infrastructure to our communities around the state, particularly obviously in rural Oregon, to make sure that our homes, our businesses, and our communities are connected. I think we have to continue to make sure that we are addressing our infrastructure investments in a way that reflect the other challenge that we are facing, and that is climate change. So how do we do this in a way that makes sure that we are reducing or limiting greenhouse gases? And then an issue that has been also at the forefront of my mind has been water. And I know we're obviously meeting on a rainy day, but we are certainly seeing the impacts of climate change in our snowpack around the state. We have several regions of the state that are in drought or in very severe drought at this point in time. And so I think we need to be making significant investments in both the built and natural environment regarding water. Generally speaking, I see public infrastructure investments as a significant role in terms of a place that the state can be a major player in terms of economic recovery. We are looking at what would be most impactful for Oregon's communities, and we are hoping that there will be additional federal investments that will help us develop, as I mentioned, broadband and targeted investments for underserved communities. In terms of the Rose Quarter update, it's obviously critical for our future of our state and our regional economy. It's also a key component of our regional transportation system. And the project, from my perspective, represents a unique once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in our communities that have been negatively impacted by our past decisions. And it provides us with an opportunity to build lasting infrastructure with the community and for the community. So I know that ODOT is working very closely with regional stakeholders like the City of Portland, Albina Vision Trust, OTA, the Oregon Trucking Association, labor, and members of the minority contracting community to achieve the safety, operational, and community benefits this project has and the unique ability to deliver. I think that this project is one of the many efforts in the Portland region to ensure that our transportation system can meet the future needs of businesses and Oregonians across the state. So let's keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you, Governor. We're going to move into questions from our audience. We have a lot of questions coming in. Just so everyone knows, what we're doing here is trying to aggregate as many of them as possible that are similar in nature. And if we don't get through the questions today, we will tee these up to the governor's staff and team to be able to answer after the session today. So with that, Sandy, I know you have the first question. And unmute yourself, Sandy.
Oh, there you go. Okay. How many times do we have to do this before we learn? Governor, I want to start by following up to Tim's question and saying thank you for keeping construction in Oregon working during this time. Our neighbors to the north didn't do that, and we see it's made a huge difference here in Oregon, so thank you. I got a question from Eric at Cascadia Health in Portland, and he'd like to know what's coming up with a special session. What are the circumstances that we will or will not see a special session of the legislature?
So thank you for that question. I anticipate that we will see a special session following the May forecast. I anticipate that the primary role of that session will be to assist in budget balancing activities. As you know, we have to keep a balanced budget, and that will be the primary role. But the second piece is the Joint Legislative Committee's done a phenomenal job laying out a roadmap that we have used for our executive orders. But one of the areas that we could not get to an executive order was on our court system. And so I know that the legislature will be making and addressing the issues regarding statute of limitations and deadlines in our judicial branch.
Great, thank you, Governor. And now I have a question here, and I think this is a really pertinent one coming all the way from Seattle, and Hannah at the Seattle Chamber of Commerce. And we all heard the news that both you and the governors of California and Washington announced that you would be working together to reopen and coordinate the economies and how do you reopen and the approaches to those. So can you just tell people what that means a little bit more tangibly so we all understand what that concept might be in relation to?
Sure. Thanks from Seattle. I literally texted both Governors Newsom and Inslee probably 2 weeks ago and said, you know, could we start working together on a shared framework? And that's exactly what we've done. I think we've aligned our frameworks. As everyone in this Zoom room knows, the disease knows no borders. And we have businesses that work in both, obviously, Oregon, Washington, California. We have folks that live in Washington that come down to Oregon. So it's just common sense that we would develop our priorities together. I would say that we are developing a common path forward, but that we're all taking individual steps. And it's going to look different probably in each of the states. I do know, for example, our chiefs are sharing coordinating concepts around how do we open our medical systems, how do we get our hospitals, our healthcare clinics, our dentist office opening as quickly as possible, and what does that look like? Our public health officers are sharing information, resources, and best practices. And I really appreciate this level of collaboration with my colleagues.
Governor, thank you. We've gotten several questions about unemployment benefits, so I think I'll give you a few of them. First of all, you announced last week, or was it this week, that you're going to lift the 1 week waiting period. Thank you very much for that. So can you talk to us about how that will roll out? Secondly, how are we doing on unclogging that system? I know it was really hard on the department and they're trying to catch up. And lastly, when will independent workers, self-employed people have access to benefits?
Thank you, Sandy, and I appreciate your patience with the employment department. These are issues that states, frankly, across the nation are wrestling with. And the reason why we couldn't move quickly on the waiving the 1 week delay is that it was going to take something like 8,000 hours of programming. We're dealing with a system, a computer system that's older than I am. So that's been a huge challenge. The department is going to work around that or work through that, but it will take time. But I can promise you that Oregonians will get every single cent due to them. The other challenges we had, obviously, they had to reprogram to address the $600 additional federal benefit, weekly benefit. That's been taken care of. And then the system also, because of the federal changes, includes workers in the gig economy and independent contractors. So those issues have been taken care of as well. I think I've mentioned we've gotten close to 290,000 claims in the last 3 weeks. That's pretty much double of what we saw during the Great Recession. And they were processing 8,000 claims a day. But I'll turn this one over to an assist from Christian Gaston to give you a little bit more detail. Christian, take it away.
Hey there, there we go. Hey everybody, this is Christian Gaston. So update on, the governor's right, the employment department is working in multiple shifts to get staff in place to move through the backlog of claims to process. We are basically up to date on what would be considered simple claims, where you've just got kind of one employer and not a lot of complicating factors. It's those more complex claims that are really kind of bogging down the system right now. And that is a people issue more than anything else. So the governor had highlighted that we're on track to reach about 800 people in the employment processing claims center. We are opening up a new center to house those folks. Folks are going to be in there on May 1st on the pandemic unemployment assistance program for those gig workers and small business owners. That program, they're doing the work, as the governor said, to get that into place right now. That's going to be a little bit of a different processing system, so hopefully it'll move a little bit quicker once it's in place, and got a little bit more than a week and a half to start seeing those claims rolling through the system.
Great, thanks, Christian. And we're seeing a lot of similar questions, but I want to highlight one coming from Sharman Sheely from the YMCA of Columbia-Willamette Valley. Thanks for asking this question. That many people are wondering, Governor, how do businesses participate in these sector subcommittees on reopening the economy and getting technical advice into your office? What would you advise them to do?
Thanks. I'm going to turn that one over to Nick, but I just want to tell you one other question about the employment department. Yesterday, Senator Betsy Johnson asked why they weren't working 24 hours a day. And a gal from the employment department responded, they're working from 5:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. in shifts, but they need that time between 12:30 and 5:30 in the morning to do updates on the program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
And sorry, I was actually so busy responding to questions in the chat, I didn't hear the question. Can you?
Oh. Participate in the sector conversations.
Oh, right. So I think the way we're trying to figure this out, we're trying to have very representative groups from the sectors listed. But I think the idea is after we issue a draft, ideally next week, we will have regional conversations about them and want to solicit feedback. So I think I don't have a great answer for how anyone with a particular point of view from a restaurant, for example, because there's thousands of restaurants can participate. But I think what we need to do is get the draft out there from the restaurant associations participating, for example. How do we get this draft out there, and then we'll have a funnel for people to comment. And I think we'll just have to get that to the sponsors of this, OBI and PBA, so that you can communicate with your members in the next few days once we have that.
Thanks, Nick. We've had questions, one from my colleague Katie Brooks and Bend, and from others about specific sectors of the economy that are closed and wondering what the timeframe might be for opening them. You mentioned, Governor, dental clinics, different kinds of medical clinics, spas, gyms, those kind of areas that people are very interested in when they might be reopening.
So spas and gyms are probably in phase 2 or phase 3 of the opening process. Healthcare, medical facilities, dental clinics, and non-emergent surgery are a focus. First of all, people need to have access to medical and dental care as quickly as possible. And I think it's such an important part of our economy. These are really good paying jobs in communities around the state. So my team is working hard on that. I expect that you will see an announcement soon. I did see in the chat room that acupuncturists were wondering about them. I would personally include them in the medical clinic because I haven't been to see my acupuncturist in a couple of weeks now, and I'm way overdue. So spas, gyms, probably phase 2.
Great, thank you, Governor. And we're running a little short on time, but it's a very good question here that I think would be a good way to sort of provide you an opportunity for a wrap-up thoughts before we go to close. And this comes from Eric Friedenwald Fishman here in Portland. I just want to know 2 to 3 things that businesses can be doing to help work through all these phases that we're in and help to generally flatten the curve and really be an assist to you and your administration.
Thanks, Eric, for the question. I think it's so important. This recovery is going to be extremely challenging. We've never seen any shuttering of an economy like this, and we've never seen a reopening like this. Your creative ideas and your innovative suggestions are very, very welcome. I think it's really important that you protect yourself and your employees and come up with solutions internally to your businesses about how you do that. I know, for example, Eric, probably your teams, a lot of those folks can work from home and obviously use technology. That doesn't work for everyone. So really looking at your places of employment and figuring out how you can ensure that your employees remain safe. Access to masks are going to be part of our normal lives over the next few months, and making sure that if you can't purchase them, and I suspect the shelves of our pharmacies are pretty bought out, that you find folks that can make them. I have a really cute mask. I won't share with you what's on it, but making sure that you have an adequate mask supply for your employees would be great. I also think this recession, this suppression is an opportunity for us to really make a significant investment in how we serve our historically underserved communities. And so what is that blueprint and how does that look different? How can we work together to lift up our rural communities that have really struggled even to come out of the last recession? How can we ensure that they have investments in infrastructure, that they have access to workforce development in the new economy that can really reignite their economies and their small businesses? And so I'll be looking to the creative, innovative entrepreneurs out there to help us develop that framework.
Thank you.
Great. I want to thank you, Governor, and really your entire team that was able to join on this call and to make this time happen. I know all of our business communities appreciate it. We want to thank everyone who submitted questions, and if you weren't able to get your questions answered, we will be making these available to your staff to be able to answer them after the session. I really want to thank Sandy for your time, Duncan for your time as well and your assistance, of course, to our sponsor, TMT Development, and Vanessa Sturgeon. And as we mentioned, we will continue to share updates with you on our website. A recording of this event will be up live later this evening. And for those of you in the Portland region, join us next Tuesday for our conversation with Metro Council President Lynn Peterson. And with that, everyone, stay healthy. Thank you so much and have a great day.